Today's discussion won't be about Bitcoin, but as many of you may know, the Bitcoin was conceived, or blockchain was conceived prior to Bitcoin, but it was the underlying technology that resulted in Bitcoin being able to be implemented. And then following from that, we had other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, and thousands of others have followed since then. And they're what you call public permissionless ledgers. But today, what we really want to focus on is the underlying technology, the blockchain itself, and how that's now becoming mainstream, how enterprise is now taking on the blockchain technology, the protocols that it creates, and actually putting it into what we call distributed ledger technology, or private permission ledgers. So today I'm going to explain and try and demystify what a blockchain is, what a distributed ledger is, how it benefits the assurance functions, and there's definitely a lot of benefits coming out of this technology for the assurance function, and also how it's actually becoming mainstream. ASX already have a service offering that's available today called Symphony that I'll talk about a bit later, and I'll also pass to later in the presentation our colleague in Western Australia, David Beros, who will talk about a real live application that is being developed to run on the Symphony platform on a distributed ledger. So where do we start? If we go back to the basics, and full disclosure, my background before being at the ASX, 3.5 years at the ASX, is actually in prop tech. I was the MD of a prop tech firm. And I understand the pain that's in that industry. And a lot of the pain actually revolves around the lease. So if you think about a property, could be a retail property or a commercial office property, the lease is the goal. The lease is what drives the income. It's what drives the valuation for the property. It's what drives the valuation for the fund. And what happens, or what has happened in the past, is you go through a lot of work to sign a lease agreement, it gets executed, and then it gets filed away in the filing cabinet. But there's others that need access to that information. The valuer needs it to be able to value the property. The asset manager needs it to be able to look at the cash flows. The fund manager needs it to value the fund and actually understand the equity position. All this being located in one filing cabinet is not an ideal situation. So what generally happens is they all have different copies of this lease. Some of them have taken a photocopy of the executed version. Some have got one that was a draft version. So in fact, no one's really using the most accurate source of data, and it's prone to a lot of error. Luckily, we dematerialized a lot of the leases, the paper-based forms, and a lot of that data is now today stored in databases. So the property manager would generally have the lease. It would be sitting in a database, and that's where the general source of data is. But you still have the situation where the valuer needs it, the asset manager needs it, the fund manager needs it, and the only way for them to get that information is actually to manually type it into their own database. So the result is we now have many databases storing that same lease information in a completely different format, and there's no guarantee without trying to reconcile all these together that they're actually the same. If there's a change that happens to the lease, it never usually gets notified to all those other interested parties. The other issue with a database is it really shows you the current state. It shows you what the lease looks like today. But that lease may have gone through a lot of changes. And unless you've got an audit trail sitting on every single record within that database, it's very difficult to determine what changed, why it changed, and who changed it. So this is where this really cool technology of blockchain comes about. So to think about what a blockchain is, a database is relational, so it stores the latest state in a relational structure, where a blockchain is really just serial. It doesn't store the latest state. What it stores is the initial state plus every change that's happened to that, in this case, that lease over a period of time. And what it does is how we form a blockchain is we start with a single block. Now, a block is a group of transactions. So transactions come in a certain order, and they get grouped together. It could be every 10, every 100, every 200. It's really arbitrary. And then what happens is a cryptographic algorithm gets applied to all those transactions that forms this thing called a hash, a cryptographic hash. And what that gives us is, if someone was going to go and change any of that data that sits in that block, if you were to apply that algorithm to it again, you would get a different hash. So you can prove at any point in time that that data is immutable, that you can trust the data that's in there because it's given you the same hash. What happens next is the hash of that block gets added to the next block that gets created, and that all gets hashed again. That's your block chain that gets created. So what we end up with is a continuous series of blocks that are immutable, that are linked together. What it also gives us, which you can't get in the standard database, is, as you can see in block 1, the original block may be the original lease that was created. Block 2, there's a change that happened, an address change. These are called events. Block 3, there was a change to the date. And block 4, the lease got terminated. At any point in time, and this is really important for the assurance function, you can look at that audit trail and actually see what change happened, who made the change, and when the change happened. But you can also replay to a certain point in time. So I could go to a year back, look at the block at that year, and actually identify what the contract looked like at that time, and then play it forward. And this is something that you just can't achieve in a standard database. So what it's giving us is immutability, including tamper resistance. The database can always be changed. You can modify a database. No one would know if someone changed something behind the scene. You can't change or easily change a blockchain.